Okay, well, ITC has a number of competency areas, broadly categorized in five: trade intelligence, business and trade policy, exporter competitiveness, trade support institutions strengthening, and of course, export strategy. And the organization has a number of programs revolving around these five core competencies. Plus, there are also cross-cutting functions such as gender and environment, which underlie all of our initiatives. Now, in the area of export strategy, we do not actually design or develop export strategies for our partner countries. ITC adopts a very particular approach in terms of facilitating a process, but whereby we want to ensure that capacity is built in the country, that there is really an ownership within the country, and we do this by adopting a very broad, collaborative and participative approach. The scope of the strategies that we design is also quite broad. You know, it focuses equally on building the supply capacities in the country in terms of trying to improve the quality of the business environment that enterprises operate in, and also in terms of enhancing the possibility of market entry. And once more, there is also a developmental orientation. So we want the export sector to succeed in a country so that employment can be generated or poverty reduced, so that there is better gender equity, better regional development and environmental sustainability. I think that like in many developing countries, Mozambique does indeed have opportunities, but it also has challenges to address. On the opportunities side, then we know that there have been significant reforms during the past decade, which are, helping the country to indeed become more sophisticated in the way it does business. The country is also rich in natural resources, mostly in terms of coal and gas, as well as oil. And there is a potential for these sectors to actually give support to other emerging sectors within the economy. The country also has a lot of arable land, which is currently not in use effectively or efficiently for the agricultural sector. So indeed, in this case, the country also has additional opportunity. And, it also has a very good geographical position, whereby it has the potential to serve as a bridge to a neighboring landlocked country in the SADC region. Now, in terms of challenges going through this national export strategy exercise, a number of these challenges have in fact come up, and I think the challenges exist at three levels: at the policy level, at the level of institutions, and also at the level of enterprises. One of the key challenges for policymakers, for instance, lies in the fact that a lot of trade that goes on in the country is still informal trade, and this, of course, has ramifications on the country's ability to generate additional wealth for the entire country. The overall business environment still suffers a bit from one would call essential fundamental services. So things like trade financing, things like access to relevant market information, and especially in the area of quality management, notably the sanitary and phytosanitary measures and infrastructure remain a bit weak. There is also a lack of a formal institutionalized framework for public and private dialogue. And I think that there is, again, greater awareness in this area because there is increasing demand to establish such a body, if you like, such a forum whereby indeed the public and the private sectors can come together in order to discuss matters relating directly to export development and competitiveness and to encourage business advocacy. I think that one of the most significant challenges, though, for the country lies in its institutions. The institutions are still relatively weak in terms of their capacities, but also in terms of their competencies, and there is indeed a recognized need for these institutions to work together more collaboratively in order to be able to move ahead. At the level of the enterprises, then I wouldn't say that there is any extraordinary challenge. You know, it is the typical challenges that one finds in all developing countries, but the three areas which are really limiting export performance and export development continue to be the absence of access to finance, the access of relevant and timely market information, as well as a shortage in skills, both technical as well as business skills that enable enterprises to manage themselves better. So I think these are some of the opportunities indeed that the country has, but also some of the challenges that need to be addressed in the short to medium term. Interesting question. First of all, a national export strategy initiative, and the way that ITC facilitates it, involves all the relevant institutions. We are indeed working with IPEX as a focal point institution, but throughout the strategy design process, a large number of other entities have been engaged in the strategy design process, whether they are public sector organizations, whether they are private sector organizations, whether they are indeed enterprises. Now, as to the focus on specific products, as you know, strategy is all about setting priorities and then allocating relatively limited resources to those priorities. If we had a situation where we could do everything for everybody, then we probably don't need strategy. But unfortunately, this is hardly ever the case. So indeed, in the Mozambique case, the strategy will focus on 5 principal product or service sectors, which have been identified as priority sectors by the national stakeholders using the ITC methodology. And what this methodology is about is it involves a number of steps. First of all, there is indeed a kind of a research exercise, a statistical exercise in order to understand what the productive capacities are of the country, but also to understand what the market trends are in the various sector. We also collect through our consultative process qualitative information, and this enables us as stakeholders to identify emerging sectors that can have a potential on the country's overall export performance, which may not otherwise be captured using statistics alone. But also, more importantly, it is to ensure that the choice of sectors which are selected coincides with the government's longer term planning. So we also take a look at the existing strategies and plans in the country, at the existing efforts, both at the policy level as well as at the operational level, and ensure that there is alignment in the choice of sectors with the priorities identified. But also, a number of criteria are set. As you know, a strategy, an export strategy in this case, can have either a competitiveness orientation or it can have a development orientation. So what is it that we want to try to achieve? Do we want to reduce poverty through this export strategy, or do we want to consolidate our market position? Now, these will determine what it is that the orientation of the overall strategy will be. So a number of these criteria are indeed taken into account. In Mozambique, there were a number of identified criteria. Indeed, the labor intensiveness, for instance, of the sector was one very important criteria, because employment is seen, the creation of employment or the retention of employment is seen as a fundamental requirement in this regard. But also, it is trying to identify where there could be spillover effects to other related sectors, and where it is that the country has the potential of attracting further investment, whether domestic or foreign. And also to ensure that there is a possibility for value addition. So this is the reason for having to prioritize, and it is how it is that the ITC facilitates the priority setting of these sectors. Of course, it is done by the stakeholders ITC facilitates. However, the National Export Strategy is not only about specific product or service sectors, because the strategy also contains what we call functional strategies. These are strategies that are not particular to any single sector, but are rather relevant to all sectors in the economy. So whilst the National Export Strategy will focus primarily on, indeed, crustaceans and mollusks, on fruit pulps and juices, on creative industries, on cashew nuts, on sesame seeds, there are also these functional strategies, such as access to trade finance, such as quality management, such as trade information and skills development, vocational and business competencies, to ensure that the whole export sector benefits from the export strategy. And each of these functions will also identify priorities that the country, the institutions of the country will actually focus on. So we consider that at the end, the national strategy will indeed benefit a much broader export sector than the ones being addressed immediately by the pre-identified sector. And indeed, there are already clear indications that other subsectors, such as the almond sector, the coconut sector, the PVPV, the chili sector, the broader fisheries sector, sugar, cotton, and oil seeds, all actually are addressed a bit more indirectly, but also quite specifically in this national export strategy. Now, how is it that the strategy should evolve? Well, thanks to the capacity building approach adopted by ITC, we hope that capacity has indeed been created in the country, whereby the stakeholders themselves will continue to ensure that they have a current strategy which continues to respond to the current opportunities and to the challenges that they have. I mean, realistically, this is the first national export strategy for Mozambique. I would think that, in a couple of years' time, a revision of this strategy, or a stock taking, if you like, of this strategy is undertaken, so that new considerations can be brought into the equation, and perhaps new products or new services can also be specifically addressed. I think that what we have is a strategy that augurs well in terms of laying the foundation, in terms of taking the first step, but certainly it cannot stop here, and the efforts have to continue in the future.